Heavenly Father, on this beautiful, chilly fall day, we thank you for the opportunity to come together to learn about your word. We would ask that you would open our hearts and our minds, that when we leave today, we may know you better. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Okay. Thoughts, questions, stuff that you want to make sure we cover? Yeah, Paul.
If you were a Jew back in these times and you got excommunicated, that would be pretty tough, wouldn't it? Would you be labeled, and it's more than just a spiritual thing, it'd be a physical thing of surviving, wouldn't it?
Well, sorry, I'm processing sort of how to respond to that. There's always more than one each town has at least one synagogue, maybe more. And yes, if you were excommunicated, it would mean that you would be expelled not just from the synagogue, but you would be expelled from friends and community. And so that's what happened to early on for many Christians who began to follow this idea that Jesus was somehow incarnate, would be expelled from the synagogue. And that would mean cutting off of all friendships and other things. It's sort of like what happens in today's world when, say, a Muslim becomes a Christian. They are disowned generally by their family, by the mosque, and so you're without community. So yeah, so it would be a significant thing to have happen to you. Yep. What else? Carl, and then Brian.
This may be related, but I noticed at the end of verse 17, when they ask the blind man who he thinks Jesus is, he says, a prophet. And that seems like a little understated to me. Maybe it's because of what we just talked about, the potential for being excommunicated.
Actually, I don't think so. But I put that down because that is part of what there's a flow and a process. There's a flow to this chapter, and prophet is part of that flow. And so we'll talk about why that fits and how that fits in the flow of the chapter. Brian.
Yeah, mine questions with verse 39, and I was wondering what the word for judgment is when it says, Jesus says, I came into the world for judgment. So those who do not see may see, and I don't consider that would be judgment, that'd be enlightenment, I would think. But is the word in Greek, or do we know what that word is? Is there a different way to interpret that word? I mean, I understand Jesus is going to judge, but it just seems that was pretty harsh statement right here, and we always, see it a different way. And then the people who see may become blind. What it kind of just said, why would he want them to become blind? I mean, I understand that's what's going to happens, but just a strange way that's worded to me.
Right, and that is all very Johannine, and I've put it down, and I'll make sure that we unpack that before we finish. When we get to that part of the chapter, we'll unpack it. But it's very John. What else? Yeah, Dexter.
Yeah, this is another heavy hitter on violating the Sabbath. And I'm sure it's been covered many times, but just so I understand, who's it coming from? Would it be seeming to be an accurate, shall we say accurate, portrayal of Jesus using the Sabbath as a message, or is it the writer? Because as you say, this book is very heavy in the anti-Jewish mode, if any of them are. So where's it coming from, really?
I'll go ahead and answer that one just because that sets the scene for much of what takes place. there was no prohibition in either Torah or Talmud against healing on the Sabbath.
Mhm.
Let me just say that up front. And so the question becomes, perhaps there may have been some Pharisees who were so sort of extraordinarily legalistic that they would have objected to that, but there's no real prohibition.
Okay.
But this is, this is sort of sets up the story, right? It helps to set up the whole issue of here. So some more modern interpreters have been Jewish interpreters just say, listen, this is just part of the story. It's not necessarily what would take place within a Jewish community. But then you have lots of Pharisees who are on a spectrum of how legalistic they are.
Okay.
So, John.
Well, I would see it with some of the highly legalistic Pharisees that they might argue that bending down, making the mud was working on the Sabbath.
Could be. That's right. You're working your finger. Right. Because again, saying that all Pharisees believe something is, there are different schools of Phariseeism. There are, in some ways, much of Jesus's teaching fits with one of the schools of Phariseeism. Because let's remember, Jesus says, the scriptures say that if, that you shouldn't lust after a woman, but if you lust after him, you've committed adultery, or you get angry with someone, you've committed murder. I mean, talk about Phariseeism, but yeah, I think that depending on which group of Pharisees and which Pharisees, possibly. Brian.
Yeah, the question I have then is, being down here in Oak Park, when we first got here, we have a Hasidic Jewish population in Oak Park, and I'd hear that they had to hire people to turn off their lights. What could you do? I mean, you had to feed yourself. Back in this time, you had to cook, you had to feed. So what could you do on the Sabbath that wouldn't violate the definition of work?
There are rules and regulations, and I do not know them all.
Okay.
All I know is that if you live close to an Orthodox synagogue, you'll see everybody walking.
Sure. Oh yeah.
And that's why you tend to have Jewish communities, because everyone lives within legal walking distance of the synagogue.
And that's hung up the freeway going through here in 696 through Oak Park for many years, because they had to build the living bridge that has trees and everything over it, so the community wasn't divided for that exact reason. But we always talk about these little things, like and I'm wondering, could you serve somebody else a glass of water, or would that be work? I mean, I know you probably don't have that answer, but just kind of yeah. Okay.
No, there are lots of rules and regulations out there,
Okay.
and you just sort of learn them, growing up.
But most of those have been man-made, I would think. I mean, I think the law comes down telling you what you can't do. It really never informs you what you can do.
Right. So in other words, real quickly, and Dexter, I saw your hand. I'll come to you in a minute.
Okay.
This is called fencing, as in building a fence around the law. Okay. So it says, "Thou shalt not do any work. Your maid, your manservant, your animals." And so, all right, so you don't want to violate the commandment not to work, but then the question is, what does work mean? And so you keep building fences saying, well, we're going to define work to make sure that we don't cross over the fence and violate the commandment. So these are not done because people are just super legalistic. They're done to protect you from violating the commandment. So it's fencing. So Dexter.
There was that finger in mud. I thought that reminded me of something. It was a trip to Israel. To this day, these threads run. I looked it up, but it's a Shabbat elevator. it's automatic. You can't use your finger to push the button. To this day.
Yes, on our trip to Israel, someone was late to the bus because they accidentally got on the Shabbat elevator.
Yeah.
It stops at every floor, and the door opens at every floor and closes at every floor and stops at every floor. And we're all going, where are they? And they walked out and said, oh, we got caught on the Shabbat elevator. And we're like, oh, okay.
But by definition, if you have to walk up to the 10th floor, that's a lot more work than just pushing the button.
Yes, it is.
I don't know what they do about that.
Yeah,
This is-
and interestingly enough, thinking about Brian's question, and he knows that because we were there, is that many Orthodox Jews go out to eat on Shabbat because that way they don't have to fix dinner. Even though someone's fixing it for them, they don't have to do the fixing. So anyway, what else? All right, let's jump into this. All right. So how does the chapter begin? What's the precipitating event that sets all of this into motion? Yeah, Rox.
The blind man.
Right,
Jesus sees the blind man.
right. So they see the blind man, but there's a question that's asked.
Who sinned?
Right.
Oh, right. Mhm.
Yeah, John or Annie. Sorry, couldn't tell whose hand that was.
The the disciples were the one that questioned, why is he blind? Did he sin? If he was blind from birth, he couldn't have sinned. So, did his parents sin?
Mhm.
Right. Now, why would they ask such a question?
Because they thought, and that, it's funny, I made a note. Common belief back then was if you became ill, it was because you did something bad.
Mhm.
You
Correct.
still see that today.
Oh, they still believe it.
Oh, yeah,
Big
a lot of
time.
people still believe it.
Mhm.
You know,
Right, because- Go
why
ahead.
is God letting this happen? Why did God do this to me?
Mhm. What did I do wrong?
Mhm.
Any of us ever ask, what did I do wrong? Right? Yeah, Brian.
But we get the opposite way too, in a lot of the stuff. If you do right, then your families will be blessed on the generation to generation too. So it kind of, and we kind of, I mean, that's all through the Old Testament. So it's got a reverse aspect to it.
Right. This is part of the wisdom tradition out of the Old Testament. For those of you who've done the 2-year Bible trek, this is the wisdom tradition. You do the right thing, you get blessed. You do the wrong thing, you get cursed. It's very, wisdom sets it out as being very straightforward. But there are books like Job that say, not so fast. Not so fast. It doesn't always work
Well, it's
that way.
I mean, that it gets into the you don't have enough faith. Your faith
Yeah.
heals you, and it's like, I'm sorry, but if God wants you healed, you'll be healed. And if God doesn't want you to be healed, he's got a reason for it, and it isn't anything you did or anything anybody else did, or
Right.
I love Paul's stuff because he pretty much puts it right down to, rather because I didn't want to get so exalted that because I saw Jesus, and I don't want to be so exalted. He put a thorn in my side, so I don't see very well, and it's nothing that I did, and it's actually to help me stay on the path, or be
Right.
belong to
Humility.
God. Yeah. It's like,
Yeah.
I like that a lot because it's, to me, when they multiply tried to heal me, I could
And you were,
say,
yeah,
you know, I was a kid and I was like, no, it's not. God made me this way for a purpose, you know, and it doesn't, everybody's not healed too.
right,
In the Bible,
right,
everybody was not healed. So,
exactly. Jesus didn't heal everybody.
nope, he didn't.
So, what's Jesus's explanation for this, though?
That the works of
Go ahead.
God might be displayed in him. And I was thinking what Marcy was saying also, that all of us have gone through difficulties, and God can heal. And I think that often, I think of a verse in Isaiah, it goes back to college days when we had to make floats there was some tradition at Wheaton, and the float was, the verse on it was from Isaiah, when tried, I shall come forth as gold. And I think very often, I think of the times of testing, and it's, we've all faced it. It's very, very hard. And yet God gives us the strength, and God gives the individual the strength to be an example, sometimes to others, of that person's faith as well as our own.
Right. Yep. Yeah, and here though, it's this interesting thing of work. Notice how many times the word work shows up here. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. So Jesus essentially ejects the whole wisdom tradition at that point. But that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the light, in the world, I am the light of the world. A lot packed in there.
Mhm.
So what do you suppose the work of God is here? John?
Well, I think here he's sending a message of reconciliation and healing. And when he talks about healing the blind man, as you pointed out in your write-up, giving him physical sight as well as spiritual sight. And as with us, the spiritual sight takes quite a bit longer than the physical sight.
Right. Because this becomes almost a living metaphor. Because people are spiritually blind and need to spiritually see. This man is physically blind, but Jesus is going to do the work of God and make him physically see, which then will lead, John, as you said, to spiritual reconciliation and spiritual sight. And this is what begins this sort of flow, Carl, that I was talking about. That Jesus says, okay, there's a purpose here. And that when he says night is coming, what do you think he's talking about there?
Life.
Pardon?
Yes, brother, sorry. This is
Oh,
Rajesh.
yeah, no, Raj, go ahead. Yeah.
So when he says night is coming, that means the death is inevitable. Like the metaphor that he uses, night for the death and light for life.
Yep.
So,
And this is also not just our life and death, but his, because he knows his death is coming. And there'll be this short window of time before his resurrection when there will be darkness. But you're right. We all face that darkness. Because then he says in verse 5, as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. So he's the one who's, again, you kind of take the whole gospel, that he's the Word who was with God and is God, was with God and is God. He is the Word made flesh. And because he's the Word made flesh, he can bring the light of God to the world and the truth of God to the world so that people can see who God is and be connected and see spiritually and be connected with God and with life, because he was the light and life of the world. So it John is kind of a hard one to pick apart. It's all this total flow of Jesus's word, life, light. Okay, so he says, all right, so now he says, you sort of have the idea of why I've come, to be the light of the world. And so now I'm going to demonstrate to you in a physical way what it means to be the light of the world. And so it's interesting, this whole thing about spitting on the ground, making mud, spreading the mud on the man's eyes. And then he tells him to do something. What does he tell him to do?
Wash himself in the, was it to one of the,
Pool of Siloam.
yeah, right, there you go.
Okay, which is a mikveh, which is one of the pools where people coming to the temple would go through and be ritually cleansed.
Mm.
And so, but what's fascinating is, if you think about it, he's not being blind. I think he would have been excluded from the temple. Lame people are excluded from the temple. And eunuchs are excluded from the temple. And so in that process of washing in that pool, not only is he made ritually clean, but he is given sight. Okay, he's transformed. All right. And then that opens up what comes next. All right, so this is not seeing and seeing, okay? So the disciples don't see how this whole thing about sin and blindness work. So Jesus has to show them, tell them that it's not because he sinned or his parents sinned. Okay, he enlightens them. Think about the metaphor, he enlightens them. Then he takes this man and he enlightens him, right? Physically enlightens him. And now this physically enlightened person enters back into society with people who are unenlightened or who are blind, who can't see. And how do we know that?
Yeah. They don't believe it's the same man.
Yeah. Yeah, wait, isn't this the guy who used to beg? Well, it's him, but others are like, no, it's someone like him. It's like they can't see what's happened. Think about it in the bigger sense. They can't see what's happened. John.
The blind and the lame were allowed to sit at the temple gate and beg for alms, but they weren't allowed in the temple.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. Yeah, and so what this does is it's a double preparation, because he goes through the ritual, but then he comes out and sees and can go into the temple. And so this is a complete healing, right? This is not just, oh, I can see. It means he can engage the community fully. All right. Yeah, Brian.
Is there another message there? Because technically, what John just said, he was an outsider. Technically, he wasn't allowed into the pool. Yet Jesus is also saying another message, by having an outsider, showing that he's not too much, I guess, into that way of looking at things, that the temple should have been opened to all.
Yeah, I'm not sure this is about the temple right now.
Right,
in
right, I
this
agree, but-
passage.
Right,
Yeah, so much as it is about
sure.
seeing and not seeing.
Right, but he orders him there when he knows it. I mean, I agree with you there. It's a big picture here, but there's a smaller picture there that he orders them to go there, you know, and as a blind man, he follows that order, knowing that, you know, he can't see, but he's probably gonna be stopped or whatever, but he has the faith
Right.
that to go there.
Yeah, someone might object.
Mhm.
And he's probably never been in the temple at Siloam. So he has to go do something he's never done. Yeah, you're right. All right, so now the people can't see. But what did he kept saying, telling them? Hey, it's me. You know, it's like, no, it is me. I am the guy. I am the guy who couldn't see. Now, who does that sound like? And this is the answer to every children's sermon question. Jesus. Because Jesus is going, I am he. He keeps saying, I am the true vine. I am the way, the truth, the life. The Father and I are one. I am, right? So think about this as a parallel track to how Jesus is operating in the world, right? So Jesus is operating at this level where he's saying, I am. I keep telling you who I am, and you guys don't believe me. And this guy is saying, I keep telling you who I am. I really am the guy who got sight back, and you're not believing me. And so it's almost like we kind of do my hands, walk like an Egyptian, kind of have two parallel tracks running here, right? And so we're gonna sort of follow that in a little way through. All right, so, and think about that. The Greek is ego eimi, which is the same meaning I am. This guy is using the same Greek as Jesus uses for I am the vine, I am the way, the truth, the life, I am. So it's this nice parallel run here. All right. But their question is,
Where is this man?
right, before where's this man it is, how did this happen, right?
Mhm,
In verse 10, how were your eyes opened?
mhm.
And now the man called Jesus, made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. Then I went and washed and received my sight. Then they say, see, and this is always so he's truthful. He speaks the truth about what Jesus did for him. And again, this is this flow and arc of the story. So you have a man who's blind, who doesn't know who Jesus is. Then Jesus puts the mud on his eyes and says, go and wash. And now when they say, who is this man? He says, well, there's this guy named Jesus. See, so he moves from being blind and not seeing Jesus and knowing who Jesus is, to now saying, Jesus, the one who healed me. That we watch these levels of faith move, right? Or recognition. Think about it as recognition. At first, he can't see him. Then he sees him only as the man who put mud on my eyes and told me to go wash, and I got my sight. Okay, so we're moving on this path. And they said to him, where is he? Right? Always the question, right? Where is he? All right. And he says, I don't know. And so in a sense, he's still flying blind because he doesn't know where Jesus is. Okay. All right. Now, they brought him to the Pharisees. So this makes it sound like there's like the Pharisee club. You know, the Pharisees all hang out here. Lots of people were Pharisees. You know, they were all over the place. It makes it sound as if they're this monolithic group of people. And in reality, it should say they brought him to some Pharisees, because they don't all hang out. They had to work. You know, Pharisees had to work like everybody else. But they were experts in the law, which is interesting. You know, it's like, why would you bring him to experts in the law? But it makes for a good story. Okay. Now it was Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees, verse 15, also began to ask him how he received his sight. Okay. So sort of the pressure's growing. And he says the same thing, put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see. Now, what's the response of the Pharisees? Rux.
That he can't be a man of God because he worked on the Sabbath. He's not
Right.
keeping the Sabbath.
Yeah, which means they are,
Blind.
yes, they're blind.
Mhm.
Again, seeing, not seen. The man had his eyes opened and he sees clearly who did this, right? But the Pharisees are blind because they can't see that Jesus is a man of God. Now, others, okay, now we're beginning to see movement in terms of faith in Jesus. With this slow, steady progression. How can a man who's a sinner, meaning someone who violates the Sabbath, do these kinds of
Good works.
Miracles.
signs?
Signs.
The Greek word there is signs.
Right.
Remember, Jesus doesn't do miracles. Jesus does
Signs.
signs. Okay, because they show something. They're not just acts of power. They're like neon signs that say, here's something about Jesus you need to see, you need to take note of. All right. And they were divided, some seeing, some not seeing, some being able to see, some are blind. So the people are now divided. So they, and we're really not sure who they are. Maybe they are the Pharisees, maybe they are the crowd. What do you see? And it's interesting, right? They now move from who did this, or how did it happen, who did it, to what conclusions do you draw about this man? And what's their conclusion? Carl? Prophet, right. Okay, so let's watch the arc of the chapter. It begins with this man being blind and having no idea who Jesus is, if Jesus is even there, what Jesus can do for him. And then he moves to a place where he's willing to be obedient, though he doesn't know who Jesus is. He's willing to trust in Jesus, that if he goes and washes his eyes in the pool at Siloam, he is going to see again. He then moves to a willingness to proclaim to all that it was Jesus who did it. He acknowledges that it's Jesus who did it. And now he's to the point of saying he's a prophet, right? So we have this upward arc of the story. And now this person's faith is at the point of seeing him as a prophet. Carl.
No, I'm still wondering why he only says he's a prophet.
Because the arc of the story is one grows in faith and understanding and sight. One does not see immediately who Jesus is. It's a process. And again, and this is the cool thing about John, Nicodemus comes at night because he can't see anything about Jesus. Then he says, well, listen, maybe we ought to let Jesus speak on his own behalf. Maybe we ought to listen to him, right? And eventually what we'll discover at the end of the Gospel of John is that Nicodemus comes to faith. So in the Gospel of John, this process of being faith, I may have made that word up. The process of being faith is a process of coming from blindness to sight. Okay, coming from darkness to light. And so there's this arc, and this chapter really, in some ways, sort of brings all of this together. All right.
And John?
Yeah. Right.
You know, I think it just kind of dawned on me here when you talked about sign for the 18th time here. That is the right word to use because Jesus is God. God can do anything. So when God's on earth, it's not a miracle when God does something because God has all that power. And the rest of the gospel we think of as a miracle, but if God's with us, it shows, right, a sign who is actually with you. So I just kind of, you know, why you said John did this way, but I think John has it absolutely 100% right, if we think about it that way.
Right. I like that. That's a good way because it just shows you more who Jesus is as the incarnate Word made flesh. Yeah. Annie.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Jesus was kind of sort of hiding in Galilee because he knew the Pharisees, the Jews were after him because of the Sabbath work he did in chapter 5, right? Healing the lame man.
Yep.
So if he was hiding out or disappearing in Galilee, why would he risk doing another Sabbath work, which would again bring attention to him and they'll get him?
Well, actually, if they're by the pool at Siloam, they're in Jerusalem. So let's get that clear. This story is in Jerusalem. And to quote the Gospel of John, his time had not yet come. That Jesus had more signs that he knew he needed to do before the end. So Jesus in the Gospel of John is never worried about being arrested before it's his time. So, all right. And so we're down to 18. Jews did not believe that. Okay, so here's this blindness again, right? Mary. Unmute yourself. There you go.
All right, so I have a question
Sure.
that deals with this. He has more signs. Now, it seems to me that he's very intentional about these signs.
Yes.
I mean, there's nothing, far-fetched in his mind about these signs, but yet all of these signs are very troublemaking.
Yes.
In the sense that it sort of goes without saying that they're going to rile people up. The good and the bad, the evil, the whole thing. So it's part of his, I am the light, sort of I am the rebeller, I am the something or another. I purposely go out of my way to make people uncomfortable.
Yes, because that's what the light and the darkness does. And part of the beginning of the Gospel of John is saying, and people didn't believe in the light because they loved darkness so much. Let's think about anyone, even in politics, right? When you shine light into the dark corner of someone someone's machinations of getting power for themselves, or, you know, an insider deal, people get upset. But it's light, right? And the light matters. And sorry, I'll use a Texas illustration of having grown up in Texas, that if you don't have your house sprayed regularly in Houston and you turn on the light, what you do is you watch the roaches scatter. So yes, so anytime the light comes on into the world, it's going to upset and irritate people. So yeah, that's part of his role as the light giver. Does that make sense, Mary? Okay. All right. So again, the blindness of the Pharisees, of his opponents, or the Jews here, not just Pharisees, the Jews, didn't believe he'd been blind and received his sight until the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, is, you know, it's like, we're not going to believe, you know, is this your son, who said he was born blind? How then does he now see? Okay, so the parents are at least willing to go part way, right? So they go part way of saying, well, yeah, this is our son, but where are they not willing to go?
They don't acknowledge what has happened to him. Let him speak for himself.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But actually, it's not just what happened to him, it's what? In verse 21. We don't know who did it. See, this is in John, this is the real struggle, right? It's are you willing to acknowledge Jesus and the signs that Jesus does? Right? And so the man is willing to acknowledge that it's Jesus who did it. The parents are not willing to acknowledge that Jesus did it. Right? And why are they not willing to do that?
They'll get excommunicated or something, thrown out.
Right. Cast out of the synagogue. And since the Gospel of John is written to Jewish Christians who I would argue have all been cast out of the synagogue. Okay. That was one of the things that happened to the Johannine community, is that they had been cast out. And so this is a real thing. This is not just maybe it'll happen. But I would argue it had happened and was continuing to happen. You know, and you just watch what happens to the Apostle Paul sometimes when he gets crossways with Jewish communities, even though he is Jewish.
Pastor?
Yep.
Jews today, right? You know, we have a synagogue right here in Southfield.
Yeah.
If a Jew today believes in Jesus, are they allowed in their synagogues?
I do not know the answer to that. I honestly, that's a great question. And I honestly do not know the answer to that. So, yeah, it'd be fascinating if someone, yes, Mary.
I don't know the answer, but I would expect it depends on what type of Jew you are talking about. Are you an Orthodox Jew? Are you, whatever? I think they would all have different attitudes going. I can't imagine that that the liberal Jewish person would discount Jesus. I think they would accept him as a person or a historical person, but
Right.
not one to believe in.
Right. I think that's absolutely right. That I would guess lots of Jews accept Jesus as a historical person, but believing that he is somehow either the Messiah or God would be beyond them. Okay, so then we get to 24. All right, so they're still don't believe. All right, so they don't believe that the guy's the guy. Then they don't believe that he was blind. So let's see how many ways they're blind. They don't believe the guy's the guy. They don't believe the guy's blind. They don't believe the guy's parents. And now, so for the second time in verse 24, the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know this man is a sinner." Now, I just love what John does. This is just so John, right? Why? Sorry, I'm trying to think even how to ask this. Why is this sort of an amusing statement? Sorry, I know I'm being cryptic. Yes, Raj.
Because I think according to the Jewish understanding, giving glory is speaking the truth. If you see in Joshua context. So when a person is summoned, so when they are asked to give glory to God, so in this sense, he has to speak the truth. The blind man is supposed to tell the truth. So that's what he meant.
Right. And also I would guess that it would be almost to repeat the Shema. Hear, O Lord, our God is one God, you know, and it's repeating the Shema. But in John's context, what would it mean to give glory to God? John, I can't, if you were, sorry.
Recognizing Christ in John's
Yes.
vernacular.
Yes. So these guys think they're asking him, like Raj said, to speak the truth, which would be the Shema, that the Lord our God is one. And he's already done it. It's like they're saying to him, well, go ahead and acknowledge that, that Jesus really is who he says he is. They're setting him up to speak the truth about Jesus. But they see this as declaring him a sinner. But the reality is, this man is already beginning to see who Jesus really is. And so what's his response to them? This guy's really bright.
Mhm.
He says he doesn't know whether he's a sinner or not, but he doesn't care
Exactly.
because he's not blind anymore.
Mm-hmm.
He kind of just provides the physical facts here, not the spiritual facts, which he later comes to.
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
So have you ever heard that line that one thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see?
Mhm.
Have we ever heard that somewhere in church before?
Amazing grace.
Yeah, amazing grace. And he pushes them. But they said to him, "What did he do to you?" How, they go back to that same thing. Right? They're just they can't even hear themselves. Right? That they're just not going to accept the answer. And I love it. He says, I've already told you,
Mhm.
and you wouldn't listen. Why do you want to hear it again? And I love this. I just love verse 27. Oh, do you want to be his disciples? You know, it's like, see, think about what he's telling is the good news. He's saying that this man, Jesus, took me from being blind and opened my eyes. That's the good news, right? I was blind, now I see. I was spiritually blind, now I see spiritually. You know, my life has been transformed. That's the good news. So do you want this too? You know, and that's the question, right? That's the central question. Do you want to move from spiritual blindness to spiritual sight? Right? And he puts it out there. You know, that's the question. And what's their response?
Well, they defile him and say that they go back to Moses because Moses is the only one that could do signs in their eyes, and
Right.
and there's no proof here that this Jesus could do it. I guess I think the reason they ask him multiple times is really kind of what we call it, wanting him to change his answer. They're putting pressure on him, hoping that he would change his answer because the problem goes away if he changes his answer. Intimidating him, I guess, is the word. But he doesn't fall for that, and he actually gets more aggressive as the more they intimidate him.
Right. He becomes more confident. Right. And if you think about this as a description of what disciples are supposed to do, that the disciples are constantly being pressured to give up on Christ, to give up on the one who is the light of the world, to give in to the pressure. But he does, as you say, Brian, he does just the opposite. Right. And again, this is this arc of faith that he's acknowledged that Jesus is a prophet, but now he's like, you know, I don't know exactly who he is, but I'm not gonna turn away. I'm going to stick with my witness as to who Jesus is. And they say, well, we don't follow him, we follow Moses. And I'm going to go back to chapter 1, verse 17. This is how John, everything's connected. The law indeed was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Right? And so here's this demonstration of that. Okay, here's how this is living out. Is this guy saying, hey, truth, grace, light, sight, it's come through Jesus. You know, you may have Moses, but which is the law, but I have more. Okay.
May I ask what verse that was?
Pardon?
John chapter 1, verse what?
17.
17, thank you.
Okay, and then he pushes them even further. You know, this is to be encouraging to all followers of Jesus. In verse 30, this is astonishing. You don't know where he comes from, right? And that's been this whole Johannine thing. You know, I've come from heaven. You don't know where I've come from. So you don't know where he comes from. Yet he opened my eyes. We know that God doesn't listen to sinners, but he does listen to the one who worships him and obeys his will. And Jesus has always said, I've only come to do the will of the one who sent me. You know, and so this guy's getting it. He's understanding. This is the one, Jesus is the one who worships God. That Jesus is the one who's doing the will of God. All of this, never since the world began. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God. Nothing was brought into being except through him. So, right, he said, never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man isn't from God, he could do nothing. This is his witness. And then they want to tie it back into the opening of the chapter. You were born entirely in sins, and you're trying to teach us. Okay. Remember, this whole conversation began with who sinned, this man or his parents. And they make the proclamation just the opposite of Jesus. He says, neither that. And these people say, no, you're born in your sins. All right. Now, Jesus hears that he's been driven out. And remember, this is illustrative of the early Christian communities. They've been driven out of the synagogues. They've been driven out of their communities. And so you think about how wonderful this sounds, that even though you've been driven out, Jesus comes to you. Jesus finds you. Okay, so Jesus goes and finds him and then asks the question, do you believe in the Son of Man? Again, thinking of the Son of Man as this descriptor of the person in Daniel who comes and saves, this messianic one from God. So, all right, so he answers. And again, he's still not, his sight is still not fully there, right? He can't fully see yet who Jesus is. And why is that? Because Jesus hasn't operated fully in his life yet. He's put him on the path. Okay. And he answered, who is he? Tell me so I may believe. Right? That's the key. That's what we're supposed to do, right? We're supposed to be, show me, tell me, so that I can believe this one who's come to be the light of the world, to save the world. And he says, you are speaking with him. And what does he do? Say and do. Say and do. What does he say first?
Does he believe?
I believe.
He worships.
Right. So he says, he makes a profession of faith. I believe. Then what does he do? Worship. And why is worship appropriate?
Giving praise and thanksgiving.
Yeah, but are we supposed to worship a human being?
Oh, no. No, you're only worshiping God, right?
I'm on the path to hell again.
Yes, we are. Worship is appropriate because he is the Word made flesh.
How are you?
Right. And so we've reached the pinnacle. He now acknowledges through worship that Jesus is who Jesus says he is. He is now he can see fully. He can see fully who Jesus is. And so we've made that complete, sort of arc from blindness to partial sight to a little more sight to standing up for who Jesus is, to believing in and worshiping Jesus. This is supposed to be the path of discipleship. Okay. Chapter 9 is sort of the path of discipleship. Now, we then come to this bit about judgment. And someone asked about judgment as we began. What do you all and actually judgment, this is a jam-packed piece of the end of this chapter of John. Okay. All right, so I came into the world for judgment, which means dividing. Okay. It's dividing between two groups. And remember, John is all about dividing between two groups, those who see and those who don't. those who believe, those who don't believe. You know, there's no gray really in the Gospel of John. It's sort of, you're on one side or the other. And so he came for those, and so this sums up what happened to the man born blind. I came into this world for judgment so that those who do not see may see. Right? That's the man born blind. Or all of us who, you know, Amazing Grace, we were blind, but now we see. Okay, this is why he came. He came so that we might all see, we might all believe, we might all find life. Okay, and those who do see may become blind. And this is saying those who think they see. Okay, like the Pharisees, they think they see, but they really don't see. Okay. Now, some of the Pharisees near him heard him, and they got it. They understood what Jesus was saying here. Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we're not blind, are we?" And actually, I need to look that up in the Greek, because questions in the Greek, depending on how they're written, can either demand a positive or a negative answer. I need to look that up and see if John has that as a positive answer. And everyone reading the Gospel of John knows the answer to the question, which is?
They are.
Yes, you are. You know? But then that last verse 41. What do you think's going on with that last verse? John.
Well, I think he's saying that because the Pharisees believe they can see, and what they don't see is God incarnate, then the sin that they have in unbelief, which sin is in John, their sin is still there because they don't recognize their own blindness.
Absolutely. Thank you, John. Brian.
I was gonna say, it's like the blind man was blind and he saw, they were both the same in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
They were both blind, but one had his eyes open, and then he says, and you would not have sinned because you were like the blind man, you would have come to realize you were good. But but now that you say you see, you're just the opposite. It's like an oxymoron here. He just turns it right around, because they truly see that Jesus is not the Savior. They don't see the sign, so therefore again blind. They were blind and they stay blind, but it's just a different way of putting it.
Right, and but though they say we see when they don't see, yeah. So it's an, you know, yeah. So anyway, so yes, Annie.
Why didn't Jesus make it easy on himself? The Pharisees were disciples of Moses because they had heard about the burning bush. They had heard about the staff turning into a serpent. Why didn't Jesus just do those things?
It wouldn't have mattered. Because this is new. Jesus is the fulfillment of all of that. Okay? Jesus is not here to simply repeat. Jesus is here to do something new, to really bring light into the darkness. So, but you know, let's be honest. He's just doing greater things because he's greater than Moses. And actually in the book of Hebrews, if you read the book of Hebrews, it's very clear that Jesus Moses did this, Jesus did this. That Jesus is greater than Moses. Yes, Raj.
Right. This same 41 verse, how do we understand, brother? He says, if you were blind, that means if you do not have the revelation, you do not have sin. That means, how do we reconcile Romans 1 with this verse? Because,
We see this verse in the context of the conversation here, not necessarily as a theological absolute. Paul in Romans is theologically absolute. We've all sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, all of us. Here, he's simply commenting on the Pharisees' attitude that they think they're really blind, but they're not willing to acknowledge it, and they say they see. So I think it's the difference between a theological absolute and a conversation. Does that make sense? It's Jesus here is
seems to be appealing. So I need to think about it. But one more question, though.
Yeah.
So the whole context of John 9, it speaks about that blindness is for the glory of God. So the works of God will be displayed. Is every sickness is for the glory of God? Can we say that, especially in the context of believers, is every sickness is for the glory of God?
No, I would not argue that. I would argue this particular person.
Only that person. Yes, thank you.
Right. Yeah. I think we have a tendency as human beings to want to generalize rather than seeing it as the specific moment. Because Jesus doesn't say everyone who's sick is for this reason. He says this man in this moment.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, Brian.
And I'll say, this man is passing judgment, and Jesus is very clear that we shouldn't be passing judgment on our neighbor. So I would think that, that would be, where Jesus was coming from. One of the things when you talk about fencing, kind of, I'm thinking about this. So the Jewish faith is here, and then man gets involved in the faith, and they do all this stuff. And I keep thinking, well, then growing up Catholic, we fenced around sin. We had a venial sin and I had mortal sins, and I in catechisms, those are less,
less sinful.
And then the Catholic Church, we had one church in the Catholic Church around 40. Luther comes around, not that he's a Messiah, but comes all the statement that grace is, we don't earn our grace. And that change, brings the church back kind of in alignment again with the Reformation, and then we're branching out. But I guess our sin, we can never get it right, period. But I like the fact that we, as Presbyterians, know we don't always have it right. So we continue to try and make it better, or reform, which is good. We recognize that, I think, and that's important to recognize.
Yeah, we are the church reformed and always reforming under the word of God. Because one of the things we recognize, as Raj pointed out, we're all sinners. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, which means none of us is going to get it right all the time. That just isn't going to happen. Roxanne.
Well, one of the things when you said the work that has to be done.
Yeah.
That we always have to be working.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right. There are always works that need doing.
Yes.
Right.
Into our belief. Yeah.
And one of the things about Presbyterians that used to be in our Book of Order is that we are saved for salvation and service. Both. Faith without works is dead, from the book of James. Yep, absolutely. Always work that needs to be done in the kingdom of God. Raj.
Okay, sorry for taking
That's all right.
some time. So why did Jesus heal this particular person in a different aspect, like taking mud and other things? Is there any historical context or theological significance in that?
Why he
the methodology
healed this man?
No. How the process of healing. taking the
Oh.
mud and then
You know, I'm sure someone has written about that, speculated on that, but off the top of my head, I couldn't tell you. I really couldn't. I'm sure someone could look it up and find something. But you know, I knew I should have looked that up before we had class today, but I didn't.
Hey, John,
Yes,
could that go
Brian.
back when I was 5 years old, we were taking a trip out to the Grand Canyon, a beast came into the car and stung me. And we stopped at this, whatever place along the highway, and an old man came out and made mud and put it on my stinger. And it relieved the pain. And someone, is that an old time remedy for healing? Mud?
Well, yes, because the reason that is
Due to
that the
poison.
stingers are acidic and the mud is base. And because I once got stung by a bunch of yellow jackets, I actually accidentally put my hand on a yellow jacket nest, which was not pleasant. And someone took toothpaste, which is base, and put it all over it. And that was the best thing they could have done for it. So yes, so I think mud is something people probably used, but I don't know if I want someone
Right.
spitting in the mud to, you know, to do that for me. Yes, Raj.
one more question, sorry.
Yeah.
Actually, as we see, like in the time of Jesus, the temple mainly controlled by Sadducees, right? But here we see that Pharisees had a place of authority, like where they can judge people and do all those things. So how do we understand that?
Yeah, the Pharisees had no, okay, so the Sanhedrin, which was the ruling council of 70, was made up of Pharisees and Sadducees.
Both, okay.
Both. Now, the temple was run by the priests. The priests really had full authority, but the Sadducees were like temple lawyers, okay? Religious lawyers is who the Sadducees were. And so the Pharisees had authority that people gave them. They had no real legal authority except those who were in the Sanhedrin, you know, and they would fight with as we know from the Apostle Paul, when he gets dragged in front of the Sanhedrin, he gets the Pharisees and Sadducees arguing with each other. And so, but for certain people, the Pharisees would be those who had not informal authority.
Right.
Okay. And so when they drag this person before these people, you know, they can't sentence him to prison. They could cast him out of the synagogue where they have authority. But that's about all.
Right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions? All right. Yeah, and this is just something, just as we close, that in many ways each chapter functions independently. Like this is about blindness and seeing. It has this arc of faith. But at the same time, it's intimately connected with all the rest of John, because all the themes are here, right? In the beginning, where Jesus came from, you know, and so that's the thing about John. To really understand it, we have to read each chapter sort of independently, yet at the same time, acknowledge that the themes of John are all present there. So, all right, who would like to close us in prayer this morning? Who'd like to do that? Anybody? All right, Brian.
Let us pray. Lord, as we depart this morning and walk through a world full of conflicts, confusion, and many, many distractions, please let us use our gift of sight to see your true light in our world, that will guide us on the path of righteousness to serve you by serving others in need. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.